Welcome to the Governance and Security Practices session, and this is for Microsoft 365 updated for our new Copilot reality. I'm so excited to be here with you, and of course, I have my good friend John. John, hello.
Hey, Karuana, how you doing?
Great. I think this is our encore presentation. Is this our third annual governance session we've presented?
I think so. It's become a tradition at this point.
It has. It has. We update it every year for those of you who want to drive health, wellness, and a great user experience in a managed way for Microsoft 365. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. We have a great agenda for you here, talking about the importance of governance, a deep dive on best practices, and helpful resources for you. And we're going to take you through kind of step by step what you need to do to think about governance all up. But it wouldn't be a governance presentation if I didn't share with you this quote. John and I have aligned on this for a long time. Good governance precedes great adoption, and frictionless self-service with robust manageability is an attainable goal without driving your users crazy. This work on teamwork governance, and you can see the link down there below where you can get our long-form documentation. This work has never been more important. You need to have a healthy Microsoft 365 environment to be AI ready. And so we're going to talk about some of the nuances of AI readiness as we go through the fundamentals of governance. It really starts with moving away from an app-centric view of the world. The scenarios that your users are going to be trying either now or in the future through Microsoft 365 Copilot or Bing Chat Enterprise or other tools that your organization may build mean that they'll be thinking about the results they're getting, the reasoned answers they're receiving, more than the app they happen to be sitting in. As an IT professional, you still do have to have governance at the M365 level. And of course, there are policies that control the experience of all of these apps. But we have to now be also thinking about the skill-centric view of the universe, right? Helping people to understand how to interact with the large language model. We highly recommend, in a good deal of our adoption material, getting people ready with Bing Chat and Bing Chat Enterprise as you evaluate the investment of Microsoft 365 Copilot and other things like Teams Premium. These AI-powered web searches create an additional component to your user experience. And we know that our users need help. Your employees need to have a very seamless experience because the pressure on them in the ever-changing, uncertain world we live in is immense. And we all need to be productive, creative, and up-level our skills. We've all experienced these scenarios, right? The broken meeting, navigating the information labyrinth, and the blank page. These are three very common scenarios that no matter your industry or size of organization, your employees are navigating. From the meeting perspective, you need to find the information that was relevant to that meeting, the people you collaborated with in a timely fashion. Most employees are also still struggling with where to find information across our Microsoft 365 tenants and more broadly across their entire organization. And then the blank page. I myself have dealt with this and had Copilot help me when I need to write a proposal, a strategy paper, even a program outline, and I'm really having difficulty getting started. So these scenarios are where the new capabilities of Microsoft 365 Copilot and Bing Chat Enterprise can come to the fore. Still, some of the foundational elements of driving governance remain the same. Right? We need to support different work styles without end user friction. Right? People may be in different or same places, they may be collaborating at the same time or different times. It's our job as IT professionals to ensure that no matter what is happening on this particular set of scenarios, that they are well governed, the data is secure, and they can get the information that they need and that they're supposed to have at the time that they need it. Users are very creative, right? They will find a way around your governance policies if they're not well designed and effective and simply just happen in the background versus being a friction to them getting work done. Different roles have different needs, however, and we've got some common ones shown here. Right. Business users, who are the users that we serve, have their set of needs, usually around speed and ease of collaboration. Employees want to make sure that they are, not inhibited by the policies and processes that we put into place. A business overall is trying to achieve some larger goals, right, to drive impact for the organization. But then we come down to the bottom, the IT admin, legal and compliance and security. And especially in the age of Copilot, the concerns of these areas are valid, and Microsoft has taken them into account as we create these new experiences that we're rolling out very broadly. But the foundational components of governance remain the same, right? And so we don't want you to think, oh, this is now a new topic. This is our third annual session at Ignite between John and myself. And so this is an ongoing conversation about making sure that you can manage as an IT professional the services and the increasing amounts of data, that legal and compliance feel confident about retention policies, supporting e-discovery and other records management capabilities, and that security feels confident that you can prevent data leaks and breaches and make sure that every employee knows that security is their responsibility. Collaboration governance in Microsoft 365 is a broad topic, but we're going to break it down into these capabilities. And John's going to take us through everything we need to know about this as we go through the process. John, I love this slide because it helps to really break things down in terms of IT and the needs of users, which are ultimately the needs of business, and then what Microsoft 365 can provide.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it gives a good idea of how many different technologies and services in the M365 ecosystem really come together for most organizations. To your point, not necessarily just large enterprises, but all the way from medium-sized commercial businesses down to those small to medium-sized.
Absolutely. I would say, well, let's hop in. Let's go to the next section here. And let's talk about these guardrails that encourage innovation and collaboration, but within boundaries. We really want to land this one central point with you. Whether you're talking about Copilot, you're talking about SharePoint, you're talking about Microsoft Teams, you must govern Microsoft 365 groups. That is the fundamental container element that you need to govern across the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. That paired with the identity of the user will create that shared and governed experience. So you not only need to do this to maintain tenant hygiene and improve the user experience, and of course you need to secure your data, but now it's necessary for you to take these governance steps to be Copilot ready. You're going to hear us talk a lot about the AI ready organization and the AI powered organization and being able to identify AI ready scenarios. All of that is predicated on what I like to call having your house in order. And we've got some tips also from inside Microsoft. Our Microsoft Digital Employee Experience groups, they do this work as well. And they have lots to say via our Inside Track blog about how we're doing it at Microsoft. David Johnson, a longtime good friend of mine that I used to work with when I was in Microsoft IT, really is bringing home the point about that governance necessary for the onboarding to teams. And then Damon is talking about your data estate and making sure that the governance tools there are also lit up. Like he's actually head of governance for Microsoft as a whole. And so that's also something for you to think about. Who has that accountability in your organization? Do you have a governance committee? Is there a board of folks that make these decisions? How can you bring people together as an IT leader to make these discussions, especially as you think about getting ready for Copilot? So John, let me turn it over to you now for this section.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a slide we've used probably for the past 5 or 6 years, and we've continued to update it with different graphics as we support Entra ID and shifted away from Azure AD. But this is a really core fundamental understanding for how M365 Groups works in the organization. So some of you may be using Groups for its full kind of collaboration capabilities of adding folks in together and having some of the shared resources. But to your point, Karuana, one of the foundational understandings is that Microsoft 365 Groups at its core really is a what I'd like to call a modern membership experience. It's how we can get folks together in, the modern distribution list, as we call it, in a centralized place in order to populate and govern our wider experiences. So for the simplest terms, it's going to be managed through Entra ID. So again, these are your kind of modern groups that are helping to build your teams, your SharePoint sites, etc., that you as an organization really want to have some good best practices around in order to not have sprawl or to have naming policies correct, etc., which we'll dive into. But it's really, really core to understand that if you don't have some governance practices around your Microsoft 365 groups, you're going to have some challenges. So even if just some baseline setups or enablements is a good place to start, and you can always edit those later, but really understanding groups, what they can do, and setting some basic guardrails is key to getting started in your organization. Wouldn't you say so, Karuana?
I absolutely agree. Yeah. I think that that's so key. And, one of the other things to note is depending upon the size of your organization, may be managing group membership with PowerShell scripts or other methodologies. There's automation that's now available. In our own community tenant, we do this. That is the infrastructure that we have for, community and user groups. And so there's a lot that's there and that makes you able to manage these things at scale. But of course, I'm happy to say that the user experience in the admin center has also improved over time from when we were first doing this back when they were O365 groups, I think they were called back then, John.
Yep.
All right. So one of the things that people often get confused about, however, is how to define these groups. We want to make sure that you have a good understanding of that by looking at this pyramid slide. So this is I want to call it kind of a roadmap for your information architecture for Microsoft 365 experiences. Now, there's some fantastic deep guidance about information architecture out there in the community. Sue Hanley and others of our Microsoft partners can work with you and have an engagement with regard to making sure that your infrastructure and your information architecture is well aligned. But from a best practice perspective, we look at it in this way. And I'm going to go from the bottom of this slide up to the top. At the bottom of the slide, this is where most people live in various work groups that they have with other members across the organization. This is their core experience of the governance and experience that you have. Now, I know it's quite popular to even still to ask people to request these groups, have them fill in a form, things of that nature. And there are third-party products that also do this. So there's more than one way to grant people access to this group, this team, and the SharePoint site that come with it. But however you do it, you want to make sure it's as frictionless for the user as possible so that they're not going around your system to do the collaboration that they need. So when we think about tier 3 teams and SharePoint sites, this work group area is where you have the most flexibility. Guests can be included in these groups. People can share documents, a lot of flexibility, and they're intended for your day-to-day working environment. Now, you can further subset those groups should you want, depending upon the type of sensitivity labels you use. For instance, at Microsoft, if you are asking for a team and you label it as highly confidential, then guests cannot be entered in that particular group. So there's great ways that are built right into the product to enable you to do that. Now, at a department level, we think of this as tier 2. So these are targeted communities. Think of it like the HR department or a sales region where you have a larger group of people and you have some curated content. You have a group of folks who are responsible for outbound communication to these folks. And this can be via Teams, depending on its size, via Viva Engage. There's often a SharePoint site that is with that you can customize to share information. And of course, these are very important now in the era of Viva Amplify because these groups can be used for targeted communications. If you haven't checked out Viva Amplify yet, now is the time. It really solves this problem of communicating at scale across email, Teams, Viva Engage, SharePoint, and more. At the top, next level is at the division level. These are primary sites where you want to make sure that there's one for your organization, like HR, marketing, employee benefits, things of that nature, your security, your training site, things like that. So these divisional level groups and sites that are in teams that are associated with them, as well as Viva engaged communities, are really about having curated information outbound and feedback inbound. Right? So you have more information coming out and being consumed by people in your organization in a one-to-many situation. And then you do want to make sure that people can give you feedback either on that page, in a community, or what have you, on the information that they're consuming. But primarily, the consumers of these divisional level or hub sites, for instance, if you designate them as a hub in SharePoint, they're not going to be editing content on those sites. They may be engaging in Teams or Viva Engage, but pretty much that's going to be curated content, just like at the top company level. So at the top company level, you also have your primary route for SharePoint, an implementation of Viva Connections, for instance, and other things that will absolutely be a one-to-many read-only experience for most folks. This is the everyone except external employees kind of group that you may be dealing with. We created this particular slide to really help people map out what type of policies should they be having at what level. John, did you want to add anything to this?
No, I think you've pitched this slide quite a bit and you summarized it very well. A lot of dense material in there, but I really encourage folks to really listen to this section because it's one of those things that you can always go back, but having a good start when you think about this structuring just helps that kind of year-long later process of kind of cleaning up the hygiene.
Absolutely. And you're pointing to the hygiene issue that we have out there in the world. There's lots of folks who started a long time ago or maybe did some rapid deployments during the beginning of the pandemic. They've rapidly made changes. Now is the time to take a pause and look at this, especially as you think about getting ready for AI and Copilot experiences. So it's very important that you have a map of how your users are interacting with these different sites and that you can govern and ensure that there is one HR site, for instance, for your organization. You want to make sure that there's not somehow two, right? Because that's also how you control the permissions there, control sensitive data, and will also control the access that a user, business user, has access to when they're putting queries in Bing Chat Enterprise or into Microsoft 365 Copilot as well.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw you a total random question that we didn't prep for, but would you say it's important to revisit that when you think about mergers, divestitures, acquisitions, right? Those are
So
something that's
important.
constantly going on. So I'd love to get your quick opinion on that.
You know, mergers and acquisitions are some of the most difficult projects I ever get pulled in on. And I usually get pulled in because there's some sort of a miscommunication about the various policies. When you are doing an M&A deal, you're merging, tenants, for instance, you really want to take that as an opportunity to clean things up and get agreement. It's super important to do that, but it's also important to get together your governance board, your user experience group of folks who hopefully include business users, IT professionals, security, legal, HR, and adoption managers or user experience specialists to really talk about the experience that you're delivering. And folks who are interested in more on that can see the adoption workbook that we put out for Microsoft 365 Copilot. There's a great section in there about creating a user experience strategy. I find that when you go through an M&A like that, if you can align on a user experience strategy, it helps you prioritize the policies you need to create and the infrastructure and the mergers and migrations that you need to do. So yeah, that's always fun working on those projects. I have so much empathy for folks who are in the IT world who have to work on that because it's really tough to do. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But we've got this quick start here to help people for sure, who can absolutely, create Microsoft 365 groups. This is essentially, these boxes are the governance quick start that you'll want to go through. Now, there was a quick start that was created for Microsoft Teams, but you can certainly up-level this to other things. And you should be thinking about it for Microsoft 365 as a whole. We're excited that our teamwork governance content is going through an update right now to bring in more product-specific content for all of you. We're excited to get that out both here and as we continue forward. So you'll want to always check the documentation. But these fundamental questions are the ones that you need to answer when it comes to your governance quick start all up. Who can create them? What naming conventions are you going to use? What meeting capabilities are assigned with the various groups? And this is especially important as we think about Teams Premium, we think about webinars, we think about who can use NDI out and stream a meeting to the internet. There are various policies that are incorporated into Microsoft Teams, especially for meetings, that you'll want to make sure that you're configuring appropriately for your organization. And you can use groups of users to control those. Maybe there's only a limited set of people who can stream content out to the internet because they're responsible for public webinars. But your average business user can't do that. Guest access is another huge component. Approved apps and data security. I want to say a little bit about guest access for a minute. And John, I want your feedback on this. I feel like guest access is the place where a governance configuration goes to die if it's not done well. Because, if you have problems having somebody at a partner organization access a document, people are going to find a way around that if it doesn't work for them. Don't you agree?
I totally agree. And I also think a point you hit on earlier is really important here, that you may have enabled guest access very quickly in order to work with partner organizations or during the pandemic. So this is, if you're watching this session, this is a really good opportunity to go back and revisit how you've structured your either federation, your guest access. We'll talk shared channels in a little bit as well. There's a lot of tools to help this, but I think you're spot on with there's a lot of greatness that comes with guest access, but there's also a lot of controls that you should have there, and making sure that you have a good internal hygiene process to remove those overextended folks, or making sure that your guests really do need access to your organization, maybe not just one piece of content.
Yes, and you can use reporting and information from the admin center to review that on a regular basis. And that is part of the automation and the improvements that we've made based on your feedback to these sorts of areas. The one piece of advice that we have for you is when you think about that hierarchy, and for one moment, I want to hop back to this slide here. When you think about this hierarchy, make sure you have a place from a work group perspective where collaboration is reasonably easy. Right. So think about people who are organizing events, or people who are collaborating on shared deals from a sales perspective. You don't want anything impeding their effectiveness. But now, for instance, in maybe a product development or an organizational change sort of team, you don't want that collaboration. So making sure that you have folks creating teams at the right level and with the right sensitivity labels will enable you to manage that guest access in a way that won't impede unnecessarily the collaboration experience. And so this is a really important thing to think about as you're setting these things up, because, if everything is locked down, what people will do is they will either save it on their local drive and email it, and then you have 15 copies of the spreadsheet floating around out there on the internet, or they will just save things on their OneDrive and share from there. And then that causes a lot of friction when new team members come in and other things. And so we'll talk about smart saving as well, but I think it's really important to be thinking about this as you answer these questions as we go forward. Fantastic. All right. There's one other point on here that I did want to make. We talk about experimentation here. Now, very rarely do we have a green field anymore where we only have, we don't have anything configured and we can start fresh. But you can do experimentation by using groups to control whether or not policies affect a set of users. So maybe you would like to test out a set of policies and a way of doing governance in your organization. You can have a set of early adopter folks who are creating groups and teams, who are saving documents, and that's how you can test your policies in the wild, if you will, with folks who will give you feedback. One of the best things that Microsoft IT did was, as they rolled out new policies and new governance capabilities as they became available in the product, they rolled it out on a phased basis. So they didn't simply blanket everyone with new policies all at once, because that is a real pain for your help desk. So they did it in phases by groups of people, and were in alignment with their roles and what have you. And so I highly encourage you to embrace experimentation, even though you're running a production environment. You want to be able to test things. And the way to do that is by having a good early adopter set of users, especially those who are outside of IT and who aren't technical by nature, to validate the way that your policies are actually going to affect them and their experience. So we do have some key responsibilities of container and content governance to discuss here also. And then I'm going to hand it over to John in a second here. But you want to really understand that that's what we're talking about here. There is data governance, there's identity governance, and there's container and content governance. And we are focused on that in this particular session. The others are equally important, but we wanted to go deep here. You want to be able to, as I've mentioned, identify the valuable content. The policies and procedures that we have and that we see in companies around the world for, again, like product specifications, organizational information changes, financial information is very different than kind of your day-to-day, I'll call it garden variety collaboration amongst people who are doing operational things across your business. So making sure that you're identifying that valuable content is step number one. Step number two is to protect those business assets. And as we've mentioned, there's a variety of ways to do that, which we're going to talk about. But, fundamentally, let's all say it together. Use MFA. Use MFA, no matter where you are, no matter how big your organization, no matter how small. Multi-factor authentication is absolutely fundamental to protecting your organization and its data. With all of the advanced threat actors around the world, it has never been more important than now. At the same time, you want to empower your employees. You might have heard me mention earlier that security is every employee's responsibility. We feel very strongly about this at Microsoft, and actually we train our own employees in this way. All of the policies and governance practices in the world won't help you if somebody calls up an employee and they give out their password. Right? Most of the breaches that we find around the world have a lot to do with that human element, right? The human psychology and the human social engineering that goes into somebody revealing private information or access credentials. And so you want to make sure that your employees feel empowered to do the right thing, that you're trusting them to do the right thing, but you're also automating the right thing on their behalf. And then you're ensuring that accountability. This is a great opportunity for either Microsoft 365 Learning Pathways or Viva Learning, where you can put out a required playlist on security practices and governance practices in your organization. If you haven't seen that, you can take a look at the ones that we've put out there. But I'm a big fan of making everyone have to go through a 1-hour course on how to protect their data. When you think about the value that your data has in your organization, it's not a lot of time for them or you to invest in creating that. And we have the tools to make that simple for you. Using something like any of our training tools, Viva Learning, Microsoft 365 Learning Pathways, or Microsoft Community Training. And of course, there are online capabilities as well. What matters about this training is that it be specific to your organization, which is why I'm a fan of the Viva Learning or Learning Pathways model, because you can have your own custom content in there alongside ours and really bring this home for your users. So John, you want to take it away and talk about protecting sensitive and confidential business data? I love this slide. I'm such a geek.
Absolutely. And I'll pretext this with this section. I think we could probably do an hour on each one of these slides, but for the sake of this conversation, we're going to go through things fairly quickly, but it should be a great call to action to double click into these capabilities on Microsoft Learn to get these set up. But again, as we think about the digital engagement that we have today across different communities, as we're frequently meeting in online meeting settings through Teams meetings, it's really important to extend that protection. And so when we think about identifying our valuable content, comes in a couple different forms, but I'd say from a big level, I'd focus on your general data loss prevention story. So whether it's using things like a DLP with Microsoft or communication compliance for more of that internal DLP identification and protection. It's really important to get these things set up in order to help you also maintain your regulatory and compliance obligations. But another big one is also sensitivity labels, as Karuana touched on earlier. And with sensitivity labels, these have been a journey. So hopefully most of you are familiar with these. But if you're not, they're a great way to apply a classification and label to a piece of content that we've now actually extended beyond just content. So sensitivity labels can also be applied to SharePoint sites, to Teams, to Outlook invites. And so these sensitivity labels help up-level that content safeguards, might have some additional encryption or different properties behind it, but it's a great way to help classify and label your data to keep it internal as well. And the last quick plug I'd have is some just kind of proactive protection for end users, something I personally love. When we take a look at things like safe links through Microsoft 365, when we click a link, it's able to make sure it tests that and recognize that it's not a malicious link. Same thing with safe attachments. Again, really nice to be able to have that proactive protection enabled, that when I open a shared link or a cloud link, or whatever it may be, that document is safe. Believe it or not, this has been a common vector, is using things like Word or Excel attachments and having malicious either URLs or essentially different types of threats inside of those content or files, sorry. And so again, safe links and safe attachments are two really easy things that your IT or security teams can get enabled here. So double clicking on sensitivity labels, not going to drain this whole slide, but again, we really extended where these labels can show up. So for those of you that have been on this journey, you've probably been familiar with applying it to a Word or Excel or PowerPoint file, confidential, highly confidential, whatever it may be. But again, we've extended this to include into things like Teams. So being able to apply a sensitivity label to a newly created team. If we apply confidential, you'll see that it actually restricts guests, etc. And so really training your end users on what these sensitivity labels are, not having too many, otherwise it can be confusing. What label do I apply when? So really kind of working through your departmental champions, as Karuana mentioned, getting the right sensitivity labels, and then working through proactive end user training, just to, again, make sure they're familiar with what the confidential or sensitivity label markings or categories are, to know when to apply it to a certain meeting invite or piece of content or just general data. Makes it really easy to have your employees be that first line of security, as we've talked about in this session. Now we move on to the general kind of protecting business assets, and this is definitely a loaded slide, but we really think about protecting those business assets both internally and externally. So I won't drain this whole slide, but the way that we frequently work and communicate across many different endpoints and services, so sending emails back and forth, sharing files, browsing SharePoint sites, getting into Viva Engage and those different communities. A lot of different endpoints that we really want to think about how are we having our governance, policy, security, compliance, et cetera, expand across these different areas. And so what it really boils down to is the governance needed. Again, we started with M365 groups who can't over enforce that enough, but then getting into your Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams services. Getting into those kind of external collaboration properties. So Teams Federation, guest access, shared channels, that kind of business-to-business collaboration that you can manage through Entra ID as well. Understanding how to manage your meeting recording. So especially as this boom has happened where we're frequently meeting online, a lot of us are recording it, either for the AI or properties of having the intelligent meeting recap or with Copilot, or just in general to have after-the-fact artifacts of what happened. But you definitely want to govern your meeting recordings, both from a storage perspective and also records management. So two different teams you'll probably have to work with, but extremely important as, again, recordings become norms for many organizations, to have good policies around that. And then lastly, kind of those identity properties. So Karuana mentioned, please with multi-factor authentication, but also extending to things like conditional access, mobile application management properties. Everyone's kind of working from their mobile devices as well, making sure that we extend those to the employee devices or any endpoints where they're frequently interacting with sensitive or even just corporate data as well. Anything you want to add here, Karuana?
No, I think you did it.
Yeah.
Let's
Awesome.
talk about meetings.
Yeah, and so this again, top of mind for many organizations, especially for folks coming out of the pandemic, where most of us were meeting virtually. There's a lot of different elements here, but I try and bubble it up to the kind of 3 or 4 most important areas to me. And first is really around the meeting options to help limit disruptions. And so this starts with things like having the right lobby controls for when we're meeting with external participants. We may want to have them all go to the lobby in order to admit them in. When we have different partner organizations or trusted federations, we could also change those properties based on that. There are a lot of meeting options that an end user or meeting organizer will see. So we like to use job aids or different kind of PDF flyers to help end users be familiar with what some of these are. And with things like Teams Premium, we're actually able to use meeting templates where we help pre-configure and even pre-enforce some of these meeting options. But even if you're not using Teams Premium, it's really important to understand what these meeting options are and how you can use them in order to place safeguards around your meeting experience. And that leads into really restricting those unauthorized attendees. And so even internal meetings with Teams links and the way that things work today, there can always be rogue actors or different kind of security breaches we want to be on the lookout for. So again, basic lobby controls are a great way to make sure that you as the internal team or presentation team is fully ready to go for this meeting, but also making sure that only the right people are inside of that meeting. And then once we're inside of the meeting, being able to delegate different meeting controls. So having those separation of roles. So comparing a presenter versus attendee and adjusting those roles as needed. Some other common little tips would be things like regulating the meeting chat. So maybe we only want to have the meeting chat enabled during the meeting itself. Once the meeting ends, we can actually disable it. And another common tip is actually doing what we call a hard mute on the not only the microphone, but also the video. So again, based on the meeting, your organization will have to think about what type of the default controls we want, but those can also help just from a presentation standpoint. Once everyone gets in there, no one's accidentally off mute or talking to their colleagues, to their friends, their family, getting that morning coffee. It just helps, again, make sure that 25 or 30-minute meeting that we have is fully optimized for the engagement and discussion.
100%. These are such great best practices for safe and engaging online meetings, but also for meetings in general. Now, of course, you're going to apply them based on the size of your meeting. I'm much more controlled about a very large meeting or a meeting with key executives or sensitive content meetings than I am the Monday morning stand up with my team, right? So you can apply these appropriately, but what's important is that you understand the menu of options. And again, that's where those job aids that you can get on support.microsoft.com and through our adoption website are super helpful. And I do want to delineate the difference between these meeting best practices and then holding an online virtual event. Whether you're using our Teams Premium webinars or whether you're using other capabilities through Microsoft 365, our virtual event playbook will walk you through the different types of guidance and policies you'd need for that. So make sure that you're thinking about what is a virtual event, what is a large scale or confidential meeting, and what are your daily practices. Again, making sure that you're tiering your response to the type of meeting and the type of content that's there. So we know that creates a much more successful user experience where people have access to what they need when they need it, but don't get overwhelmed or over controlled depending upon the situation that they might be in. And now, one of our favorite topics, John, you want to go through this?
Yeah, absolutely. When we think about guest access federation and the way that we work externally, it starts with, again, basic guest access. So bringing these, what we call guest roles into our organization. Also things like domain to domain federation. But when, again, we think specifically with guest access, it's really important to understand that in most terms, we're bringing this folks into our tenant. And so they're going to have a little bit wider of access than someone that we're just federated with and we can chat through Teams. And as a guest comes into our tenant, again, there's some restrictions that they're only available to see, certain level of content. But when we do have guests in our organization, we want to make sure that we're also doing those hygiene reviews that we talked about earlier on. So there is some great automation with some of our Entra ID products that you're able to do, but some form here also requires some manual intervention and making sure, again, that we're looking for overextended users or guests, I should say, guests that are maybe in teams or groups or different areas that are maybe a little bit more sensitive than they should be a part of. And that's where we can start to think about, are there different tools or external collaboration functionalities that we can leverage here versus guest access, which again opens up to someone that is someone you're frequently working with and do have a trusted model here where we want to bring them into our organization. And before I ask your opinion here, Karuana, I'd like to just add, when we think of guest access internally at Microsoft, these are, again, people that we're going to trust working with us almost on a day-to-day or weekly level. If it's someone that is a kind of an off-base or just single project, we might look to use a different avenue here.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's really important to delineate again, what kind of guests are you talking about? We have business guests, we have vendors who get vendor access based on the time of their contract. Most of our groups and SharePoint sites will have guest access expire periodically and require the owners of those teams and experiences to validate that the guests should be extended. I'm a big fan of that. I think that it also then puts the onus in the hands of the owners of those teams and SharePoint sites to make sure that access is correct, which goes back to my earlier topic about the fact that security is everyone's responsibility. So using that automation to make sure that guests are being reviewed and the right kind of guest is getting the right kind of access is a very important component for sure. And of course, we have what's next, our team's channels that we have to think of as well, which have come a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we think about guest inviter role, also something that we want to really think through, who are we empowering to bring guests into our organization? We typically don't want to centralize this around IT only. Let's reduce some of their workload and their friction. But again, this can go departmental champions, or if you're maybe a small scale security oriented company, you could probably trust your broader user group. But if you're a 500,000 seat organization, again, you may want to use some champions or specific people that are departmental or business group leads around this. And even now getting into channels, same concept. When you think about how we work across different channels, you have your standard Teams channels today, which is where most folks are familiar with working. But then we've moved into things called private channels. And so this kind of creates, for lack of a better term, a isolated container where folks kind of have a need to know access into that channel. You have to be specifically invited into that channel, and it's going to have a specific set of resources that only those folks inside that channel, not the broader team, are able to access. So private channels are a great way to not create more teams, but instead create that kind of isolated or enhanced container that has maybe more sensitive business data, processes, discussions going on without having to, again, create an additional team, which creates an additional governance and hygiene and management perspective on your IT group. And then lastly, moving on to the right-hand side, shared channels. These are one of my favorite things to use because, again, it helps us get out of that practice of creating additional teams, where in the reality is we really want to create more channels when necessary. There are opportunities where creating a new team is the right way to go, but we always want to think through that mindset of what are we trying to solve here. And if the idea is that we want to specifically share a channel and its resources with internal folks, even with external folks, one of the better ways to think about this is, are we able to share this channel specifically, or do we need to create a new team? I think that's where shared channels with teams has really kind of helped out.
I think it's a huge issue because what we've seen over time is a lot of people use Microsoft Teams simply using group chat. And that's because there hasn't been clarity around when to use channels and when to use chat. And also there's been some friction points, frankly, in the different tenant and identity experiences across Microsoft Teams. But with the new Teams, which I encourage all of you to be learning about right now via the link shown here, it's very much a simplified experience. And so whether it's shared channels, whether it's sharing information across different tenants across Microsoft 365, we very much have as a best practices, fewer teams, more channels, less group chat, because it really does help people not feel that their information is fragmented across different input surfaces, which creates a good deal of fatigue in our information worker community.
I love the way you frame that. And I would say a learning we probably had at Microsoft over the last 7 years of Teams is exactly that. Less teams, more channels to create ease of management on everybody.
Yes. And it does take somebody to get stuff in that channel, right? Until people build the habit, somebody has to be a channel champion. especially in a large team with different channels on different topics. Like who's really accountable for making sure the right information is in there, because we are still talking about human behavioral change at the end of the day.
I won't drain this slide. This could, again, probably be an entire day's worth of discussion as we think about getting into the Azure Active Directory portal and managing things like our cross-tenant access settings. So again, B2B or business-to-business direct connect is default off, but this is an area as you start working with partners, external organizations, maybe someone that you will be merging with but haven't quite gone through the process yet. Really thinking about how you're going to optimize and enable that business-to-business collaboration. So we have granular controls here. We also have things around how you're going to have trust with external tenants, different types of things like compliant devices, of course, enabling multi-factor authentication. But this is an area that this should be a call to action for folks. If you do manage external collaboration for your organization, please become very familiar with this cross-tenant access settings area inside of Azure Active Directory or Entra ID, because there's a lot that you can enable here and also govern, which goes back to that simple principle of reducing friction on end users while also having that security and compliance trust in the back of your mind. And so as we think about some of the group naming and expiration policies, and this leads into our empowering employees to self-create and also be self-practicing for security, it starts with things like naming benefits. And so this could be things like blocking out blocked words. Doesn't have to be necessarily profanity. It could be things that we want to reserve for proper naming context, whether it's a brand, a logo, a brand, a custom acronym, HR, different things like that. Every organization likes to have different naming conventions, and so we want to really lean into that. Although with also naming guidance, again, we can have some parameters around there just to make sure that we have a good scale going forwards. My favorite thing with groups that helps really empower employees to manage this is around expiration. So this helps IT. It also helps us as employees to make sure that the group or kind of container that we're using still has a valid use case. And so again, this will be set to your organization. You may even set different expiration policies based on the sensitivity. But again, these are a great kind of natural way to challenge folks that are group owners to make sure that they're still having use in here, that they know what content is in there, maybe what guests may be available as part of it. And of course, most importantly, if a group does expire, no one opts in to renew that group. We do have a 30-day soft deletion to where IT can go back and restore it. So you get plenty of opportunity as a group owner to renew that group. But in the event that it does expire, we can go back to our IT team and beg for forgiveness that they restore that group after that 30 days. And the last area I'll say here, control governance in phases. This is a really great flow chart in thinking through laddering up to that earlier slide that Karuana showed of some of the basic M365 groups governance or quick start. So again, I'm not going to drain through every one of these, but this is a great slide to take a quick screenshot or a snippet of and kind of use as your walkthrough as you go through this. Again, different organizations are going to use this differently, but I think this is a really great high altitude view of all that you can do with some of the container and content governance.
Absolutely. And it goes back to what we were talking about in terms of making sure to roll things out, not all at once, but in pieces so that your users can get accustomed to the new way, testing things out with the early adopters and what have you. So on our teamwork governance, long form documentation, we go through these different capabilities with the associated documentation you need from a product perspective. So there are multiple products involved in Microsoft 365 governance. And so that's why we tried to bring this together as a cohesive view. And we'll continue to update it as new capabilities come along. And some of those new capabilities are actually here today. And that's why we want to talk a little bit about some foundational knowledge. For a long time, John and I, and myself in particular, have been in the SharePoint bubble. And in the SharePoint bubble, we used to say OneDrive is for me and SharePoint is for we. But if you had a chance to see the announcements recently with regard to the future of file management, there's so much innovation happening in the OneDrive space, and it's really evolving to be a my content experience. It's broader than just my own files that I'm keeping for myself that I'm not really sharing with everyone. But one of the things that you have to do to make that really work well is utilize the shortcuts and the syncs in your Microsoft Teams SharePoint files experiences, because what that will do is will make those sites available right in your OneDrive experience, which is very easily accessed from the backstage of Office applications like Word or PowerPoint and Excel. And why I call it smart saving is you're saving something in the right place the first time. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a OneDrive link from somebody, but it needs to be shared in the broader team. It's not in the team really it's supposed to be because folks didn't do this, right? And they couldn't necessarily figure out very easily how to get something into the site that they happen to have been working on. Now, the algorithm in the backstage of Office, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and what have you, shows you recently activated sites and also shows you ones that you have pinned. But sometimes it takes a minute for that to show up, and in the fury of your work, you might need something else. So I always help people do this smart saving when they know they're going to be working, especially in a private channel on a regular basis. And so there's a new content that's available on Coffee in the Cloud to walk you through this. You'll hear a lot more about smart saving because it's so useful and helps you be Copilot and AI ready when your content is in the cloud, in the context, the permissions context it needs to be in, to be used or not used, depending upon the scope of that person's, permissions. So I think it's really important for us to get really clear about smart saving, have people and encourage people to save things in those SharePoint and Teams experiences directly, and then make sure to always use that OneDrive and My Content experience to easily find whatever you're looking for. I love its new ability to help me see meeting content simply. I can filter by person. There's some great content that you can review on that. And of course, the recent announcement event that is still available online. So make sure you check that out, but be thinking about that because as we go forward into this area of Microsoft 365 Copilot, there's new and additional governance components, right? Of course, Microsoft 365 Copilot and Bing Chat Enterprise are built on our comprehensive approach of security, compliance, privacy, and responsible AI. That is table stakes for our organization. We value the trust that you put in us. But you want to be thinking about how you're controlling the input into Copilot, right? The access controls, the information protection, enabling these grounding sources, who has access to what data across your data estate, and whether you enable plugins or not. Right. And then there's the next phase of actually optimizing your Microsoft 365 tenant for use in the Copilot reality. Now, of course, it may be a little while before you have Copilot in your organization, but today you have access to Bing Chat Enterprise. And Bing Chat Enterprise is a fantastic way to make your entry into understanding the value of these generative AI experiences for you. I call it the aha moment. Very important that you have your aha moment and that you can understand the work and the fun that is ahead of you by having Copilot support you in the work that you're trying to do. Of course, there are security components of this experience, and you can see other content that's available on data and security, on deep dives into the way our large language models work. There's a lot of information out there which you can find, but it's really important for you to have a concept of the way this works as you step into governance more broadly across the M365 space. These AI experiences are not going anywhere. They are here to stay. And their ability to improve productivity and unleash creativity and up-level skills is very relevant. And so it really matters that you have the right kinds of IT policies and end user guidance as you think about stepping into this new world. Now, I'm not deep diving into the technical readiness workshop that we have available for you and the content that we have on our Copilot Hub. But I really want you to be thinking about it as you think about governance all up, because now we're talking about more than just Microsoft 365 groups or SharePoint or Office applications. We're actually talking about the data itself and how the semantic index understands the permissions around that data and in the case of Microsoft 365 Copilot, which has access to the Microsoft Graph, the way in which that is given back to the user in terms of responses to prompts. And so, this is a new world for us. But together we can have fun with fundamentals, have the right IT policies, have the right end user guidance, and be ready for what comes next. John?
I think you put it very well. And a thing I love that you said is the AI is here to stay, right? Generative AI is only going to get more important in organization, and it's a tool for all of us as information workers and employees to leverage. So I think this is a really cool opportunity for IT professionals like you and myself to go out there and be the champion for organizations, to dispel what this stuff is, how we're going to use it, what those ethics and responsibility principles look like for our internal organizations. So I think for those of you that are watching this session, this is a chance for you to be that hero of your organization and really start to help your business leaders understand how are you going to use these things, because it's likely your competition is. It's also likely that younger folks entering the workforce are going to be very familiar with these things. If they're using Bing Chat or Chat GPT, they're going to come into the workforce expecting to be able to use these tools. So, Karuana, I'd love to get your opinion on, you and I are big IT pro advocates, how folks can kind of think of this.
Absolutely. Well, creating your own governance questions, I think, is really important here. But also, I mean, you hit on something there that I want to deep dive into just a little bit. Being an AI powered organization, I don't believe is going to be optional. I think it's going to be table stakes for organizations that can move into the future with the missions that they have. We have our mission, right? Empowering everyone and every organization on the planet to achieve more. But what is yours? What is your company's mission? And how does AI and these new capabilities fit into delivering and expanding on that mission? So you do need to be ready from a competitive perspective. And from an IT perspective, it's a tremendous career opportunity. Right. The content that's available today on Microsoft Learn, where you can learn about Copilot, you can take the technical readiness courses that are already available. We're continuing to land and launch more of those. I think it's really important from an IT perspective that you master Microsoft 365 governance, which is a huge part of readiness for AI capabilities. And then you'll be able to talk about, the way these capabilities are working from a technical perspective. And that's what our technical readiness guidance is all about. And it's why you're here with us today, I'm sure. But this is a great list of questions to focus on as you think about what do you need to do next.
And I'll quickly add, about 10 years ago, a lot of the architecture work we thought of was moving from on-premises to the cloud. In a weird way, I think a lot of the architecture work we're thinking about now is how we're going to embrace AI to exactly your point. It is not an opt-in experience. It's here to stay. It will become kind of the backbone of the way that many organizations work.
Absolutely, absolutely. Protection and governance across Microsoft 365 will deliver these things and so much more to your organization. And I know in these sessions, whenever folks come to our workshop, they want to see that hands-on information. We wouldn't be able to get through the theory and the top level of this. Please put in your session surveys if you'd like to see a longer webinar series on this very topic. John and I will take that back and do what we can with it. But we want you to know that the content is there and available between the information and teamwork governance and the information on Microsoft Learn. You'll be able to get started. And then, of course, you come into the Microsoft community to get your information and to get your questions answered. We do have some resources that are available for you here. The Copilot Readiness Hub is being constantly updated with new information for IT professionals, business users, and adoption managers who are thinking about how to drive this throughout their organization. We have content available on adoption.microsoft.com for Bing Chat Enterprise as well. And so the readiness material and the community that we have there is really there for you to continue to engage with us, ask your questions, and really navigate all of this change that we're dealing with. And of course, we have our resource cheat sheet with all of the content between our roadmap, our main community link, the teamwork governance link we've been talking about, and our show, of course, Coffee in the Cloud, where we go through a good deal of this content and take feedback on various topics across Microsoft 365. So with that, we're so happy that you've joined us for this session. If you're super passionate about this in your organization, join our Champions program, because you can be a champion whether you're an IT professional or you come from a user training background. And every month we talk about new features and capabilities. We have slides that you can use to help educate people in your own organization. And we're really here for you. There's so much free information available from Microsoft. We want to make sure you take advantage of that. John, any closing thoughts?
No, I think my main takeaway would be we have a lot of deep dive content you could really get into, and hopefully it serves as a good starting point for folks. So if there were slides with governance questions or frameworks that you found helpful, take those slides and start those internal conversations with your stakeholders that we talked about to get these things going. It's a lot, but we try and give you the kind of North Star of where we think you should be heading in a quick 60-minute session.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're so excited. Thank you so much for joining us for this session, the third annual Microsoft 365 governance session. Always happy to do this with you, John. Thank you so much. And we'll see everyone soon.